The Cedar Rapids Public Library acts as the Zoom host and the registration host for this event. Elaine is the energy, excitement, and creativity behind this project, but I am your go-to if you need any help accessing Zoom recordings, or usually every episode of the Grant Wood Country Forum is edited and then posted on our YouTube channel. But as of this morning, I still didn't have that video uploaded. That's in somebody else's inbox waiting to come up to the internet, but it should be up. I thought it would be up this afternoon. I didn't double check, and I will in the meantime during the presentation, and I'll drop that in the chat box if it's ready to post. But we're all very excited here at the library that we have another, I was telling Sean, what I think is a very robust gathering. I think, having 20s, 30s of people for a Zoom meeting on a Monday night is really remarkable. And we're very excited to have you all here, and we're very grateful. A couple friendly reminders. I will turn the microphone over for some welcome and announcements, but as your Zoom jockey for the evening, I would remind you to mute your microphones if it's not your turn to speak. That is an important part of the presentation. And other than that, we have two incredible speakers this evening that we're welcoming, and I'll turn the floor over to Elaine.
Oh, thank you so much for your collaboration and your just wonderful presence with us, Meredith, on behalf of the Cedar Rapids Public Library. And I'm just seeing all your friendly faces here back for more. I do have some quick announcements. Let's see, what time do we have here? Okay, I think I have time to make a few quick announcements so we can stay on schedule. So if I could share my screen, I'm going to do that. Okay. And joining us now is Jennifer King, the Secretary Treasurer of the Oh, you would think there's my here. There we go. Okay. So this is, this is our second of 8 sessions now for this 2023 edition of the Grant Wood Country Forum. Again, I want to thank the Cedar Rapids Public Library, the Anamosa Library and Learning Center, Cedar Rapids Museum of Art, Iowa Poetry Association. It's just wonderful to have your collaboration with us. And tonight's session will feature, we have a double hitter. We've got of presentations, Grant Wood, Farm Boy to American Icon with Sean Ulmer, Executive Director of Cedar Rapids Museum of Art, yay! Followed by Kari Nicely, Director of the American Gothic House and Center in Eldon, yay! Who will talk to us about the American Gothic House, the making of an iconic image with global impact. And of course, we are happy to have our resident poetry guru, if I may call you a guru, Dawn. She's like, no, I'm not a guru. No. Wonderful presence here as president of the Iowa Poetry Association, a great poet in her own right, helping us with some tips and tricks. And so a reminder, for those of you who may not know it, that this is our 3rd forum season, and this is an all enthusiast-driven initiative. So in collaboration with our organizational partners, everybody else is donating their time, expertise, and enthusiasm to this endeavor. And we thank you so much for doing that. And that includes some of our speakers who will be coming up in the weeks to come: Joe Coffey, Barbara Feller, Steve Hanks, Paul Jewell, Dorothy Bunny Montgomery, Sylvia Popelka. And as Dawn keeps popping in and helping us do things every week, we just appreciate how vital and dynamic your participation makes this endeavor on behalf of all of us. So I just can't say enough. Looking forward a little bit, next week we'll have Steve Hankin coming in speaking to rural life in context during the Grant Wood era. And he is a wealth of knowledge, man about town, or man about the field, maybe one might say. He has a lot to say about a lot of things, and all these discoveries that are always just so fun to share. So looking forward to that, followed by Joe Coffey the next week regarding the city life in context. And then followed by that, and Barbara will do a session on women's work in the Grant Wood era, which will be fascinating, quote unquote. We're concentrating somewhat on women's lives during the Grant Wood era. And we'll have 2 featured artworks during this series that will roll around in. The first being, we'll be exploring Daughters of Revolution, again with Barbara Feller and Sylvia Popelka. That's so exciting to have that coming up. And also the appraisal with Paul Jewell and Dorothy Bunny Montgomery. I mean, just so wonderful to be able to have folks who know so much about these things and learn more on behalf of all of us and share it. So thank you. Quick reminders and update about submissions and reading to the Grant Wood Country Chronicle. Submission season is open. I've already started receiving a few things and would love to just, as you guys feel inspired, please forward things to us, and we'll just get things in the pipeline and ready. The deadline is Sunday, March 12th. But what I want to mention is I would like to start next week's session with an opportunity for people to read anything that they might have written since the series started. And so feel free to shoot me an email or just raise your hand when we start the next session and say, hey, I did something, or message me or something. And just say, hey, let's get used to the idea of sharing our creative words with each other. And so there's a couple ways you can communicate, but in advance, and that would be via Facebook message to either me or the Grant Wood Country Forum page, or to email GWCF Grant Wood Country Forum at Windstream. So but don't feel like you have to email me. If you just show up next week and have something to read for us, we'll make space for that. A word about simultaneous submissions. This came up because we're collaborating so closely with the Iowa Poetry Association this year, and we're doing we've collaborated to offer with them a Grant Wood Country Poetry Award as part of their contest through Iowa Poetry Association. And so I wanted to make sure that folks knew, that everyone knows, that if you submit to that contest, I will, and you let me know that you submitted to that contest, that you submitted something to that contest. And no matter whether you place or get published in Lyrical Iowa or not, I would like to commit to putting those pieces in our 2024 Chronicle. The timing of the 2 publications don't work to do it in the 2023 Chronicle, but I can easily commit to having kind of a value added offering there. So if you want to be involved in the Iowa Poetry Association contest, especially the Grant Wood Country Award for ekphrastic poetry, and I hope you do, just write an additional poem for the Chronicle this year. And then this year poem will get next year's Chronicle, as well as you're being considered through the Iowa Poetry Association's contest this year. So if you have any questions about that, you can always email and ask questions, and I'd be happy to answer those. And also, for those of you who don't live in Iowa, we're going to be doing an editor's choice selections for this next Chronicle. So we're looking forward to doing that too. So it's not necessarily a contest, but we'll shine some light on a few things, because I want everybody across the country who's involved in this to know that there's a place for you as well. So, and then we've already talked about our organizational partners. I think we kind of know what the form is now. Kath, I see a friend, Kath, and artist extraordinaire, Kathy Rickers is in the house tonight. Hello, Kathy. Thank you so much for popping in. And Kathy, I've mentioned before, has graciously offered to professionally graphically design the next Chronicle. And so happy to have you be part of that. And thank you so much, Kathy, for that act of artistic love on behalf of us. So I think, let's see, what time is it? How are things looking here? Oh, goodness. And so we're hoping to have a little bit of time towards the end of the series too. We'll embed time to ask questions of Sean after and Kari after each of their presentations. So if you have questions and comments, so we'll do that then. I think we're going to stay on schedule. How about that? So I would love, Sean, if you would be game to let everyone know how it is you ended up at Cedar Rapids Museum of Art, kind of what your background is a little bit, and as to set this all up for us.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you, Meredith. Thank you, Elaine, for inviting me to participate yet again in the Grant Wood Country Forum. Grant Wood, of course, is a very important part of the Cedar Rapids Museum of Art, and I will share a little bit with you about what we have on view currently right now. But before that, I will follow Elaine's advice and do a little self-introduction here. You know, I came to the Cedar Rapids Museum of Art in 2005 as its curator. And when my boss, the director, retired, I applied for his position and became director in 2014. But prior to my coming to the Cedar Rapids Museum of Art, I was the curator of modern and contemporary art at the University of Michigan Museum of Art. And prior to that, I was the associate curator of painting and sculpture at the Herbert F. Johnson Museum of Art at Cornell University in Ithaca. But I began my career, I should say, in two places. One at the Wexner Center for the Arts, which is a contemporary art center on the campus of The Ohio State University. But while I was studying art history, I worked at the Toledo Museum of Art. And that's where my love of objects was born. And so ever since then, while I enjoyed, being in academic settings, I really love working with objects. And so, when the opportunity came to work at the Cedar Rapids Museum of Art, and its really, really wonderful collection, I was thrilled to be given, that opportunity. It is a very, very different kind of collection. It is primarily American. It is primarily early 20th century. And we, unlike many other museums, we tend to hold certain artists in great depth. And one of those artists is Grant Wood. We have 240 works by Grant Wood in the collection. Nearly half of them are works on paper because of the very nature of preservation and preserving paper. They cannot be out on view for extended periods of time. But we do find occasions and opportunities to bring those works out. But we do have a gallery dedicated to the work of Grant Wood, where from the works that are hardy enough to be on extended view, we have selected some of Grant Wood's best works in our possession and create kind of an overview, if you will, of Grant Wood's artistic career. And so what I thought I would do this evening is share that exhibition, that installation with you, because these pieces were carefully chosen. They were chosen for the different kinds of stories they tell about Grant Wood's life. And I thought it would be good to share that with you as a group to kind of give you that foundation and sort of really lead up to the second presentation this evening. Is going to look at Grant Wood's most famous work, American Gothic. Alas, we do not have that work in our collection. But it's not very far away. It's it's a short 4-hour drive to Chicago if you want to visit it, and well worth doing, because it's a wonderful work to see in person, first of all, and then the Art Institute has a few other not so bad pieces to take a look at while you're there. So, it's well worth the trip for many reasons. But as is, I think, a trip to the Cedar Rapids Museum of Art. Because we have some really wonderful works by Grant Wood that, because we hold artists in great depth, we can tell a fuller story of that artist's life. If you have only one piece, okay, American Gothic, not a bad one piece to have, but we're fortunate to have a wonderful collection of works by Grant Wood, and we can really show him evolve as an artist in this one gallery display. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here, and let's see where we are. And I need to give that just a second. Okay. Can everybody see that then? A nod of the head, if you can see. Okay, great, excellent. So, okay, so let me just go here and slideshow. Okay, now, let's see here. Hang on just a second. I think I lost. Hang on just a second here. Okay, all right. I know when I do this, I lose everybody, and I was afraid I clicked off on the wrong thing. So I will do it again here, and give me just a second to share my screen. All right, there we go. So, what I did is I really assembled a PowerPoint presentation that looks at our one gallery installation, which we titled Grant Wood from Farm Boy to American Icon, because it really does trace the trajectory of his career. And I thought I would go through each of the works that are on display. There's not so many that we can't do this, and take a quick look at why we chose some of these works to be included in the exhibition. And we've arranged the exhibition more or less chronologically, although those of you who are familiar with the museum galleries know that they're very porous galleries, so you can kind of wander in, at least in the gallery dedicated to Grant Wood, from 3 different directions. But we're hopeful that people start with this, which is the earliest work that we have on view. Of course, he made work earlier than this as well, but this is the one that we start our installation with, called 3178. And it dates from 1918. And this is really a painting of Grant Wood's house, a house that he built with his friend Paul Hansen. And this kind of goes back really sort of the early part of his career, when, as you know, he was born in Anamosa and moves to Cedar Rapids at the age of 10 when his father passes away and his mother sells the farm. And he goes to school here in Cedar Rapids, and then he goes off when he graduates from Washington High School, and spends first some time in Minneapolis studying, and then comes back in the summers, and then is really by training a metalsmith. And but it is his time in Minneapolis, plus his where he kind of studied under the tenets of the arts and crafts movement, and his reading of the Craftsman magazine in his youth, that really inspired the building of this house. So he comes back and acquires some land and builds a little rustic shack in 1916. And they live in that shack, and then he and Paul Hansen build identical side-by-side homes that come right out of magazines such as Craftsman's Homes, where you have the floor plans and the blueprints. And he really builds this with his friend Paul together by 2 identical houses. And this is the number, this is the address, 3178. It was in the Kenwood section of Cedar Rapids, and the house still exists, but it's been so heavily modified that it doesn't look anything like this. But you can see that this very much looks like a craftsman home. It's certainly a home of its period. He built it the following year. So in 1917, he built it. And in 1918, he paints it in this painting, which is on view. And this is an important work for a number of reasons. Not only does it document this other side of Grant Wood's life and career, his work as a metalsmith, but also, his work with architecture, which is something that really helped forge the beginning of his career. But it also demonstrates his interest in being a painter, which is not something that we see to a great extent earlier in his career. Yes, being a metalsmith, being a metal artist was important, but the highest form of art was painting, and Grant Wood knew that, and Grant Wood explored that basically by teaching himself primarily how to paint. And so this is an early example of him working in oil. It is somewhat impressionistic. By that I mean he's following the American Impressionism movement, which was popular at the time. And that really got its inspiration from French Impressionism. And that's characterized by loose brushwork. You can definitely see the way he's moving paint around on this canvas, and a great interest in light. The Impressionists were fascinated in capturing light because they knew that light was fleeting and it would change at any given moment. And when you look closely at a painting like this, you can see that it is a bright sunlit day in Cedar Rapids, but that the tree is creating this wonderful dapple across the hip roof of the craftsman style house. And you can also see where the overhang of the house is creating a raking shadow across the facade of the house. So you get this wonderful contrast of light and dark, and the play of light. And that helps to emphasize the momentary quality, the fleeting quality that one often finds in impressionistic work. And he knows about Impressionism because Impressionism is already well known in the United States, but he was also an avid reader. And was well aware of art movements. A lot of people think of Grant Wood as being, in Cedar Rapids, being in Iowa, and being somehow in a vacuum. And he wasn't. He was well read. He had an insatiable appetite for knowledge, and he was not afraid to try things like painting, and really sort of got himself knowing, he really was a self-motivated, almost really an entrepreneurial artist long before that term was really in vogue as it is today. I mean, he really decided, I'm going to be an artist and I'm going to be a full-time artist, and he made that happen. And so he was really a fascinating character from many different angles. And this is kind of where, on the painting scene, this is kind of where it really begins. It begins in these late teens, and he's very much under the influence of Impressionism. Next to that, on the wall, is this Misty Day, Fountain of the Observatory, Paris, from 1920. The Observatory Gardens is a small garden right off of the Luxembourg Gardens in Paris. Now, Grant Wood and his best friend Marvin Cohn went to Paris in the summer of 1920 to see the city, to see the museums, to experience all of the arts in Paris, and to paint. And that is what they did. And this is a small painting. As you can see, it's only 7 by 10 inches that he did in this Observatory Gardens right off of the Luxembourg Gardens. And so both Grant Wood and Marvin Cohn really enjoyed spending time painting in and about the Luxembourg Gardens. They didn't limit themselves to that, but this painting is a quick study that Grant Wood did. It is small. In all likelihood, he worked this up into a bigger canvas because we have in Marvin Cohn's diary from 1920, we have an entry where he says Grant drew in a big canvas of the Carpeaux Fountain on July 24th, 1920. This is the Carpeaux Fountain that you find in the observatory gardens. But this is a small work. This is not a big canvas, as Marvin Cohn was describing it. So this was probably a study that he did prior to July 24th, that he then took back to the room that they shared, and would paint probably on one of the rainy days that they experienced a great number of in the summer of 1920. But you can see here, even though it's a sketch, it still it maintains this great impressionistic feel. You can see the very loose brushwork. Obviously, that's certainly more what you would expect in a sketch. But this is what Grant Wood was doing. He is working in this stylistic vein already. And if you look at the centerpiece of the Carpeaux Fountain, with the figures holding up an orb, he's taking great care to put down all of the metal lines, the metal parts of that orb to allow the sky to come through. He could very easily have sketched that much simpler. But I think this is actually a little bit more than a sketch. I think he's really putting down things. There's a lot of detail, really, for an impressionist in a work such as this. And of course, one of the things that he did is he titled the work Misty Day. And that was a trope that one usually finds with the Impressionists. The Impressionists were interested in oftentimes going to the same location over and over again, but at different times of the day, in different weather conditions and in different seasons, to see how that same scene changes. Now, Grant Wood and Marvin Cohn weren't in France long enough to be there in different seasons. They were only there in the summer of 1920. But Grant Wood really capitalized on the fact that this was a misty day, one of those misty days that one does find in Paris. And the Impressionists were well known for including a time of day, a season, or some sort of weather in the titles of their work. And Grant Wood is following that model by calling this primarily Misty Day. And that's how he named this work. Now here's an actual photograph of the Carpeaux Fountain in the observatory gardens. It was a famous spot. Many artists painted this throughout the year, and Grant Wood was no stranger to that. As one kind of goes around the gallery on an adjacent wall, a freestanding wall, is this remarkable work, Adoration of the Home, from 1920-21. It's a larger work. It's 81 inches wide. And that is because it actually was sort of a miniature billboard. This is a work that he created for Henry Ely. Ely was a local home developer, and he was looking for a kind of billboard, a small billboard, that he could put under an overhang on a model home that he had built in the downtown area of Cedar Rapids, so that businessmen could see the model home on their lunch hours and then potentially buy a home out in really kind of the further Kenwood area of Cedar Rapids, where the country meets the city. And that's exactly what we have represented here. We have in the center this sort of goddess figure holding up a model home surrounded by other humans and gods. On the one side, you have the country. On the other side, you have the city. And it really was, these homes were being built at that juxtaposition between the country and the city. And on either side were small panels of text that were sort of, that were accompanying the work that we have in older photographs, but are no longer extant with this work. And it is framed in a frame that is painted by Grant Wood. Beautiful, beautiful detail work that he did on the frame of it. And this is another work that's important because, number one, it's a different way in which Grant Wood was trying to make a living. This would have been a commission. And so, Henry Ely would have come to him and, or he to him, and they would have worked out a deal where he would create this work for money. So he's not creating work because he's, spending the summer in France. He's creating work to make a living. And so commissions are very, very important to the lifeblood of many artists, especially artists that want to be, completely independent and work full time. This is their bread and butter. And so it's important from that point of view. Plus, it's a fairly unique work in Grant Wood's of. It is kind of a miniature billboard. And so, that's kind of interesting in and of itself, quite frankly. But it's also very much betrays Grant Wood's knowledge of classical mythology, with his reference to gods and goddesses, and the whole pyramidal shape of the seated figure in the center. You can almost draw a big triangle from the apex of her head, through the two seated figures to the side. That makes her a very, very stable composition. It was a very, very common method for Renaissance artists, so this work betrays Grant's knowledge not only of classical mythology, but also of Renaissance art. And he's really created in this sort of shallow frieze-like form a terrific composition that nominally advertises these homes being built, but really is much, much more than that. And then around the corner from that is the Mourner's Bench. And the Mourner's Bench is actually a work that is on loan to us from the Cedar Rapids Community School District. This is a piece that Grant Wood created in wood with the assistance of some of his students from McKinley Junior High School. And this was a bench that would sit outside the principal's office. And this is where you would go if you misbehaved in class. You would be sent to the principal's office and you would sit on this bench, and where you kind of mourned your fate, basically. And you're reminded that you are to sit there and contemplate your transgressions by the expression, the way of the transgressor is hard. And if you had any doubts what was to come to you, you see the little finials are small heads of students who have sat there before you, weeping, as you see here, because they're fearful of their transgressions. And it's a really, really remarkable piece, and really speaks to his time as a teacher, and his collaboration with his students, which he did on several different occasions, but also his sense of humor. And that is something that we see recur in a number of Grant Wood works. He didn't often work in wood, and but when he did, it was really sort of a tour de force. Next to that, we have this painting called New Plaster from 1924, from Grant Wood's second trip to Paris, when he went to study at the Académie Julienne in Paris. And here you can see he's still very much under the sway of Impressionism. He still has a somewhat loose brushwork. You can see this is really an odd sort of scene. It's basically a scene of a home that has gotten a fresh coat of plaster on part of it, which is why you see that brighter section of it. That's where the new plaster is. And that sort of weird curiousness of going by a very old house and seeing new plaster on it. This kind of thing that would have captured Grant Wood's attention, so much so that he wanted to sit down and capture it in oil on board. And I think it's really kind of interesting on another level altogether. I mean, he is in Paris and he's seeing this conflation of old and new. An old house with new plaster, and you see that in many different parts of Paris. It's a very, very old and ancient city, but at the same time, it is a new and thriving metropolis with all kinds of new, exciting artwork and architecture happening. And Grant Wood was experiencing it all. So in a way, I think that's another sort of subtext to this painting is Grant Wood's recognition that Paris is a city of old and new. Of course, as you probably know, Grant Wood moved into his studio at 5 Turner Alley in 1924. And one of the first things that he does is fashion this door for the studio. On the studio itself, which the museum owns and operates, we have a reproduction of the door, but the actual door is currently on view in our Grant Wood Gallery in this exhibition. And you can see that it is a life-size door. It's actually fashioned from an old coffin lid. Back in the day, coffin lids had windows in them, so you could see the deceased through the window. You didn't have an open or a closed casket, as it were, but you had this sort of hybrid. And he used this to create a dial that would inform potential visitors of what he was up to, because certainly Grant Wood was a well-known commodity in the Cedar Rapids community, even by the 20s, and so it was frequent that people could feel very much comfortable walking right into his studio. But this was not just a studio; it was where he also lived, and his mother lived, and sometimes his sister lived as well. And so this was he needed some sort of communication. It's sort of their early form of Facebook, I guess, in a way, where he's communicating to people, and that he's out of town, or he's in, or he's coming back to the studio at a certain time, or he's taking a bath, or he's having a party. This again betrays his sense of humor, as we see in a number of his works. But this is really, really inventive way of communicating, a sort of answering machine, if you will, that before the time, so that people would know whether or not he was home or not. And next to that, we have another fairly whimsical piece by Grant Wood, and these are called this is one of 2 that we have on view, called Lilies of the Alley. And these are little clay flower pots that Grant Wood has filled with wire and metal and objects that he would find in and about his studio, in the alleyway there, which gives the pieces their name, Lilies of the Alley. And so very non-art making materials that he has crafted into this sort of very contemporary metallic, largely metallic bouquet, if you will, that he oftentimes would present as a hostess gift or some such. I know of 4 of these in existence. We own 2 of them. There could be more out there, but they're really, really remarkable pieces. And a great demonstration of how you can make art out of anything, out of the most common of materials. And although scholars have not really discussed this in context with Grant Wood, I wonder if he was also playing around with the idea of Dada, the Dada art movement, which really sort of looked at what art can be and how to redefine what art is by using atypical materials. And this certainly would fit right at home, sort of in a Dada setting, I think. Although we don't have any proof or any knowledge that Grant Wood was interested in the Dada art movement, but knowing that he was actually, very, very aware of other art movements around, and he could very well, and probably was very well aware of Dada art. It could have been an exploration of that. I could be seeing things in there that don't exist too. But I think that it certainly does betray his playfulness and his very expansive concept of what art is and can be. Door by the Old Well, Saint-Emilion, is from 1926. This is his 3rd trip to Paris. He had an exhibition at the Galerie Carmine, which is on the Rue de Seine. And he went over early and created a series of paintings for that exhibition. And many of them had doors and doorways featuring in them. This is one that has a doorway. It's not the central subject matter of the painting, the well is, but it's interesting that he makes sure that in the title, Door by the Old Well, that the door is mentioned first and foremost. And most of the paintings in this exhibition, which he thought would launch his career, but alas, it did not, dealt with the door and doorway. And so it's not too, it's sort of interesting to know that, you know, he's fashioned a door for his studio. And then he goes off and he's painting a whole series of these doors. It was really kind of a door moment for Grant Wood. And of course, doors are, you know, filled with symbolism. You know, they're passageways, they're opportunities, or they're closures. And there's many ways in which to read doors, and that doors have been read in the history of art. And it's interesting that Grant Wood is doing this, and interesting too that Marvin Cohn also spends some time exploring doors and picturing doors and what those doors mean, you know, as far as opportunity and mystery and all sorts of different things. Doorways are and passageways in general are open to all sorts of interpretation. But you can see even here in 1926, he is still painting in an impressionistic manner. You can see that in the loose brushwork, especially with regard to the vegetation. And then here, Red and Yellow House in Munich from 1828. This is from his fourth trip to Europe, when he goes to Munich to oversee the construction of the stained glass window for the Veterans Memorial Building. And he's based primarily in Munich. He does explore a little bit in Germany. And here's a painting that he did while he was in Munich. You can see that it's still very, very impressionistic. It's still a lot of loose brushwork compared to what he was to do in the future. And so he is still very interested in light and shadow. I mean, you see these wonderful cast shadows from something that's not even pictured in the picture plane. All those shadows in the foreground are being cast by something standing behind him. But you can see the wonderful shadows of the tree and how those, you know, kind of caress the facades of the houses beyond. He's still very much interested in light and shadow, even on the, you know, even on just sort of a simple street scene such as this. But it is this trip in 1928 to Germany that was pivotal, amongst other things, to him changing his style right about this time. One was, of course, the stained glass window itself. It was a major commission. When it was finished, it was the largest stained glass window in the United States. And Grant Wood had to conceive of that work in a very different way. You know, all of the different colors in the stained glass window had to be held in place by leading. It had to be held in place by metal. And so he had to conceive of a composition in which everything has a firm edge, because that's where the leading would go. So there was that. There was also this. In the late 20s, Grant Wood began to get a series of commissions, which again was a way that helped, you know, pay the bills, commissions for portraits. Now, you can paint an impressionistic portrait of a sitter, but it is particularly difficult, and most sitters don't want that. They want a portrait that looks like them. And so that oftentimes requires the artist to paint differently, to paint something that is a little bit more naturalistic. In this case, portrait of John B. Turner, who was the father of his patron David Turner, and he's painting him as he looked, and that required firmer edges, and a little bit more naturalism, not the loose brushwork that one normally associates with Impressionism. This is an important and wonderful sort of portrait, not only because of the connection to one of Grant Wood's great supporters, David Turner, but because he's placed John B. Turner in front of an 1869 map of Lynn County, and is sort of positioning John B. Turner as a pioneer, as a major player in this county. And famously, John B. Turner remarked about the piece that it was really a painting of two old maps. The map of his face, full of its lines and creases and wrinkles, and the map he's sitting in front of. But it's more than that in many ways, because Grant Wood took liberties with the Lynn County map. He removed districts so that he could have this wonderful border running vertically along the right-hand side of the painting. He removed two districts so that he can move that over, because he loved to include those tiny little vignettes, as were common in 19th century maps. Vignettes of famous places, kind of in sort of circular forms, and he makes sure that those little decorative details, and Grant Wood always loved the decorative details, were included. So he took liberties, as was his right as an artist. He took liberties by amending the map of Lynn County, so it provided the proper background for what was, the real subject matter here, and that's John B. Turner. And it's also kind of interesting when you look at the piece in person, but you can see a trace, if you will, and a sort of an oval trace around the work. And that's because sometime after he painted this rectangular configuration, it actually was framed up in an oval frame. And all of the stuff that was outside the oval was covered up by the frame. That oval frame, of course, has now been removed so that you can see the whole of the composition, but you can still see the residue of where that frame was, and it's just not safe conservation-wise to mess with it, because we don't want to do anything that will harm the work, and conservators have told us it's best just to leave it exactly the way it is, as a rectangular form where you can still see the traces of the oval outline of the oval frame on the composition. So another interesting sidebar for this particular painting. Next to that is Woman with Plants, and this is a portrait of his mother. And this is the portrait that was really inspired by his trip to Germany. The third thing, in addition to the stained glass window and his series of portraits, of which this is one, is that when he was in Germany, he was exposed to the work of Northern Renaissance painters firsthand. And he was fascinated by them. And he did say he was very interested in the work of Hans Memling, a Northern Renaissance painter. And so when he comes back, he paints this portrait of his mother, and it very much comes out of the Northern Renaissance tradition of a sitter in the foreground holding an attribute against a landscape, with a beautiful graded sky. And this comes right out of Northern Renaissance oil painting. And he's very much inspired in it, but it was painstaking. It took a lot more time to paint this way. The Northern Renaissance painters were not impressionistic. They were very interested in detail and firm edges. And so you see him adopting that, partly because it's a portrait, but partly because he's, interested in Northern Renaissance work. You still see a little painterliness in the hands and face, but the body has changed completely. Much firmer edges. And this is really, these three things, I think, in combination, and I don't think you can point to just one of them. I think all three of these things in combination really allowed Grant Wood to change the way in which he painted. And he applies this to landscape as well. This is over mantle decoration. This is a portrait, if you will, of the Staymates house in Cedar Rapids. And it was painted for the Staymates family, and it hung above their fireplace. It was over the mantle. And it is the Staymates house that you can find on Linden Drive, still there, but it never existed back when people were riding on horseback and wearing antebellum clothing. He has historicized this. He's placed it back in time, and he's put it in a roundel, and that format comes right out of those 19th century maps. We saw that 19th century map behind John B. Turner. This is one of those little roundels, if you will, but blown up to a very large scale. This is over 5 feet wide. It's a large work. And he has, again, sort of painted the entire thing with firm edges. Most of the painterliness is gone out of this composition. Everything has a very firm edge. And he has simplified a lot of the landscape forms for readability. There's wonderful anecdotal elements, lots of detail. There's a cat on the front porch that's watching a robin in the front lawn pulling up a worm. There's this interesting kind of play going on here, but it is a wonderful application of this new style to landscape, which we see.
Oh, Sean, this is wonderful, and I'm just popping in to let you know that we're gonna. I wish we could have you the whole 2 hours, so we might do. How are you doing?
Sorry, I did not. With the PowerPoint, I can't see anything, including the time. So I apologize for going long.
No apologies.
And indeed, I'm way over. So I do apologize for that. I'll just flash through the rest of these. And welcome anyone to come to the museum and see them in person.
Oh, absolutely.
Where this comes from, when you look at Overmantel, this is the next year. And this is Autumn Oaks that comes the year after that. This is a kind of hybrid painting where you see some of that firm edges, but you still see an element of painterliness, especially in the grasses. So he doesn't completely abandon it like many people think. He actually continues to use Impressionism where it is appropriate. Here, you'll also see this study for a mural that I have a photograph of the actual mural that is on view at the Iowa State University. Again, simplification here of forms, firmer edges, all for representation, another representation of farm life. And then the last work in the exhibition is Spring in the Country, one of the last paintings that he created shortly before his death in February of 1942, part of a pear spring in town and spring in the country. And here, again, you see it's sort of a hybrid. He has simplified form. There's a lot of firm edges in a composition such as this. But if you look very closely at the foreground, the dirt in the foreground and so forth, a lot of little tiny dots, almost as if it's pointillistic in his treatment. So and you see that also in the clouds. In person, you can see that much better, and you can see that he's using whatever artistic styles that he thinks are appropriate in his composition. So we are going to see here, stop sharing so we can pass the mantle on. So I apologize for going over. I had no idea. I was talking. No
apologies required. We love it. We just get all immersed in it. And I want to make sure if anybody watching this has not been to the Cedar Rapids Museum of Art, oh my gosh, it really is a critical mass of Grant Wood. And that's just it. I mean, there's so much there just on display, and that's not even the bulk of what you have. You bring everything out every so often for a special exhibition, There was one, was it just last year? Was it 2021 or 2021 into 22?
Yeah. 2021, from like February through the summer, we extended it, but we brought out, those are the most Grant Wood works that have ever been out anywhere at any time. And so we brought out a lot of the paper that can't be out all the time. So it was a great opportunity to see early youthful crayon drawings, and he really was quite sophisticated at a very, very young age. He really had an extraordinary amount of talent. And so we brought that all the way through more metal work and so forth. But we do that from time to time. You know, we bring out more, but you will see, for example, we're about to open an exhibition on architecture. And so we've included one of the works, sort of the overall arched work of the Cherry Building is in, you know, which is sort of an exterior portrait of the Cherry Building. That is in that show. And then several of the drawings that he did for the Turner Mortuary interiors, those are part of that. So we find other ways to bring out Grant Wood works, especially works on paper, so they can be part of thematic exhibitions, such as the one that we're doing on architecture that opens to the public on February 4th.
Wonderful. Thank you. Question for you, Sean, in the chat. Can you identify the people in Spring in the Country?
I cannot.
The subjects are, anyway, curious
No.
about the
No,
subject.
he did use models. We do have photographs of models that he used for Spring in Town. And some of those people are known. I do not know who he used as models for Spring in the Country.
But were they intended to depict his father, mother, self? That's been speculation.
It certainly is a
Anybody else want to
possibility.
weigh in on that?
Certainly is a possibility, but of course, you know, he wasn't the only child. He would have had siblings,
Right.
and so you know, then they all worked the farm, except Nan. She was a little too young. They all worked the farm, and Grant Wood was, you know, 10 at the time that his father died, so he worked, you know, until that point. But so I mean, it's possible. Certainly, you know, a lot of things are possible. There's much that we don't know about Grant Wood, and much that we do know. And that's just one of those things where we don't know who the models are in that particular, or who they are supposed to represent.
Right, right. And there's lots of thank yous in the chat, Sean. I just want you to know that there's critical mass of thank yous and kudos. So
It was my pleasure. Thank you for inviting me. I appreciate it.
oh, absolutely. And let me make sure I'm not missing anything here. How long will the architecture exhibit be available?
It opens on the 4th and it closes in mid-May. So you have a good time to, good long time to see it.
Wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. Let's see here. Oh, Kari might be able to tell us a little bit more, and it's time. So does anybody have any questions that they didn't put in the chat, or any comments at this point? If not,
Elaine, just one quick question here for Sean. He mentioned that there were 4 lilies of the valley that he knew of, and that Cedar Rapids Museum of Art had 2. Sean, do you know where the other 2 are?
It's known, but I don't know off the top of my head. But yeah, it's known. They're not as nice as ours, if I can say that. Oh wait, this is being recorded. They're all lovely. They're all lovely. So I'm partial to ours. Okay.
Are they in Iowa? Sean, do you know if they're in Iowa somewhere?
I want to say at least one of them is. So, but let me dig down into that. I knew at one time, but there's only so much I can keep into this noggin these days. So, but there's yeah, but I know of 4. I have to imagine that there were more. You know, and for some reasons unbeknownst, they didn't survive. But I do know of 4, and I'm just thrilled that we have 2 of them.
what? Wonderful. Yeah, that's neat. That's really nifty. So, oh my gosh, everybody, keep your yeah, if that does, I mean, that I'm inspired. You know, I just love seeing that whole trajectory, and I love to hear you speak about Dada. And speaking a little bit more of you use lots of adjectives to describe Grant Wood this time that I had maybe keyed in on before. And I kind of wrote a bunch of them down. I'm like, yeah, that's it. You know, just how expansive he was. What a Renaissance type person he just naturally was. And which, you know, he's so prolific as a result, obviously. yeah, a real thinker as well. So I think that's one of the things that draws me to him too, is just this broad expanse, this love, this curiosity, all that. And so thank you for capturing that so well, Sean. Thanks again. Now we'll turn our attention to the American Gothic House. Would you like to unmute, Carrie?
Sure.
Awesome. Oh, and I'm so happy to have you here. And we have such a nice crowd of folks here for you this evening. Welcome, welcome. And would love to hear a little bit about you in your own words, about how you came to be involved in the American Gothic Center yourself. Anything you'd like to tell us about your background, and just go ahead and launch into it.
Well, actually, after hearing how eloquently he spoke, I'm kind of feeling a little out of my element. I've been a public speaker for the last 18 years, but it's about something that I know and I know well. I've been a naturalist, and so environmental education is what I do. I also teach environmental biology at William Penn, but I was with County Conservation, and after being a naturalist, I was a little ready for something different, but I didn't want to leave the conservation field. So the position here at Wapello County, because we are run under the conservation department, the center is, became open, and I applied. And because I had experience in county conservation already, I think that kind of gave me a leg up on getting the position. But in the last year, I've been in the position a little over a year. And like I said, I'm feeling a little inadequate, and I don't want to say anything that you guys don't already know. But I'm still learning. I am, instead of the environmental education side, I am becoming really active in the tourism side. And so my job to try to figure out how to get people to come here, I'm actually really thriving on that. I love that challenge. And so in the meantime, I met Steve. I'm sure he's on there somewhere. He's my new best friend. That's what I call him. My new best friend, Steve. And we connected over that environmental aspect, actually. And how do you take the Ice Age and bring it to Grant Wood? Well, I can do it, and so can he. And I never met anybody that could do that before. So we connected immediately, and graciously he invited me to come up, and we had a little tour. I brought the assistant administrator with me, and I do have to say, Steve, if you're listening, that has really helped me when I speak with visitors to the center, because I can say I've been there. And it really makes things real, real for me. And so with that, like I said, I spend every day, and I'm learning as I go along. And I'm not a Grant Wood expert in any way, shape, or form. I have somebody that wants to interview me on Friday. And I said, well, I don't know how much I'm going to be able to tell you, but okay, I'll tell you at least the stories I know about American Gothic. I can at least speak halfway intelligently about that. So with that being said, I have a PowerPoint. Did you want me to share that? You have, I mean,
that'd be awesome. That would be great.
and
And by the way, we're an art, history, and cultural kind of endeavor here. So just when you think you might not know a lot about one thing, we have another ballpark that you can play in. So whatever you have to share, I'm so glad that you're here to do that. So,
well, I think I can go ahead and just share this. This is how I do it when I'm in class. So can you guys see what I'm sharing?
yes.
You can. Okay, so let me get over here and get to my from current slide. Well, that's not what I was going after, but I guess that's what we'll do. But again, this is back to, you know, a lot of the things that you already know. When I do public speaking, this is where I start. I start with Grant Wood, where he was born, when he was born, that he grew up when he moved to Cedar Rapids as a young man, about 10 years old, when his father passed away. And just a real quick cap on how he studied art and then came to create American Gothic in 1930, and then about 12 years later, he died of pancreatic cancer just hours before his birthday. And so I think we've already talked a little bit about 5 Turner Alley. That is one place that I was able to at least visit the exterior. And I do have to tell you that it was, for lack of a better term, classier than I thought it was going to be, because I'm thinking, okay, Turner Alley, it's in the back of a funeral home. And I was thinking typical alley, right? I wasn't thinking this brick building with that door that we were able to, you know, look at. It's just, like I said, it just was classier than what I was expecting when I was like, okay, it's, you know, in an alley. But with that being said, you know, when people come here, they're like, well, why did Grant Wood even come to Eldon? Well, first of all, this is part of where my environmental background comes in, because Eldon was a railroad community, and it was as such until about the 1980s. We have coal that's around the area, and then being right there on the Des Moines River, Eldon was just the perfect place to put that railroad to connect this part of Iowa with really the rest of the world with those railroad lines, and to be able to bring goods and services here, but to take our coal to other places as well. Now, the stories that I hear about Eldon, how it was quite, you know, you think of Cedar Rapids, right? And you have this big city and the streets and lots of opportunities and places to go and see and people. Well, when they talk about Eldon, that Eldon used to be that way, I do have to chuckle, because I'm just saying, I'm sitting here in a town of just over 700 people, and, you know, we're lucky that we just got a brand new restaurant. And to hear them talk about the, you know, the Opera House, and above City Hall, there was a dance hall, and there were hotels. I mean, are you kidding me? Where was there a hotel here? But there were hotels because that's, you know, on the railroad, this was a place where people stayed overnight. This was the overnighter, so to speak. But once the railroad left, so did a lot of the businesses and people as well. So in 1930, Edward Rowan he needed a place where he could have these art exhibits, and he needed a place where he could rent someplace short-term and not have these long-term commitments. Well, as I understand it. So Eldon was the ticket to that, where he could do that. And the second week of these shows that he was giving featured Cedar Rapids artists, of which that's when Grant Wood was invited to come here. And so when he was here, he hooked up with John Sharp, and John took him around town, and they came across this little house that he felt, he kind of laughed a little bit from the stories I hear, that he was amused and thought it was funny because that big window on such a small house, he thought it was pretentious. And so Sharp stopped their vehicle and allowed, well, some of them, I guess, some of my slides were hidden like I wanted them to be. But anyway, allowed Grant Wood to go up to the house and ask the then owner, Mary Jones, if it was okay. He says, I have this idea. can I paint your house or sketch your house for a painting that I have? And she says, oh, yes. And she got very excited and she called her daughter and the daughter came over and they cleaned top to bottom and scrubbed and washed those curtains and pressed them. And they waited and waited and waited and waited for Grant Wood to come back. Well, little did she know that Grant Wood just went right back out to the vehicle and just sketched it from right there in the car. And so when the painting debuted in the fall, a few months later, needless to say, she was not happy that those in the painting, that was not her curtains. So with that being said, this Carpenter Gothic style is something, that word Gothic is so tricky. And it is one that I work very hard to overcome the idea that it's, you know, the type of dress and the black makeup and the jewelry and the goth. I try very hard. And I'm just as guilty as anyone else when I say Gothic house. Okay, I need to say American Gothic house, and I need to say that consistently because it means something completely different. American Gothic house has to do with that Carpenter Gothic style, with the emphasis on the vertical. And so again, shortly after I got this position, I had a professor from Dublin, Ireland, contact me and said, I am visiting the States in August. I want to come interview you. And again, I said, well, I don't know how much information you're going to get from me. At the time, I'd only been in that job 3 months, and I don't know how much you're going to get from me, but sure, come on over. So she is an English professor who, one of her first sentences out of her mouth happened to be about comparing Goth with Carpenter Gothic style. And I said, I'm sorry, you must have misunderstood. This is not the conversation that I'm going to engage in. We're not going to have an interview on this because this is something that we try really hard to steer from. And so we went ahead with the interview, and she sent me a transcript of the interview for my permission to use my words in her research paper that she is doing for her position as a professor. I have not yet given her my permission because I am really conflicted, because I don't think that's where I want to be. I don't want to be even in a comparison between the two, because that's not what we're about. So I haven't yet given her that permission. So, I mean, she's in Ireland. I don't know if I'll ever know if she used it or not, but you know, I tried to explain to her it's Gothic style. It has to do with the emphasis on the vertical, with that type of siding, the window, everything points up, the columns. That's what we're about. And so with that being said, it always cracks me up when people come into the center and they're very insistent on going inside the house. And it's like, and I kind of crack up in tear, you know, inside. And I'm thinking, and then I do tell them, and I do say, Grant Wood didn't even step foot inside the house. He went up on the porch, asked permission from outside, and then went back to his car. He didn't even go in. And the importance of the house has nothing to do with the interior, because even the curtains were not Mary Jones's curtains. It was Grant Wood's pattern that he came up with in his style. But they ever insist they want to see the inside. And some of it is just, you know, people that like to see those older homes. And that's kind of fun too. I mean, I hold a real estate license, so I kind of get it. But the pictures that you see in my PowerPoint is the one on the top is when you first walk in that front door. There is a nearly identical room behind it. And then the kitchen, and then you see a door, not the one with the curtain, but the other one. there's a little tiny bathroom. Now that is an addition that was put on by the Joneses in the 1920s, and it was definitely there when the painting was sketched and created. And then the second thing about the house is that you can't go upstairs anyway to see the actual window. The state says no, they own the house, it's their rules. And I'll tell you kind of a cute story here in a second. I'm not sure if I have well, I'll just tell it to you now. You can see to the right of this window, this is not the front window. This is a picture of the back window, because there is an identical window in the back. And the reason why you can't go upstairs is because the staircase is incredibly narrow. And even me, I am 5'4", I'm short, I have very small feet. I wear a size 5.5 or 6, and my feet don't even fit completely on the steps. And when I go up the stairs, I have to duck. And so then you come into the room where you can see, you know, to the right of that picture, and you see that back window. Well, with that being said, it leads you to wonder about how they even got their furniture upstairs, because that's where the bedrooms were. And the original, the Dibbles, they had 8 kids in here in these total of 4 rooms. And so how do you get the furniture up there? Well, it's this back window is the key. You can barely see, but that window is on hinges. And so you open the window, and then they would use a pulley and they would get the furniture up to the 2nd floor. Now here's the cute story. So the house is only open because I have to staff it with volunteers, April through October on the 2nd Saturday of the month. Well, it was in the summer, I can't remember which month it was, and I had a couple that came in from Amsterdam. And we happened to be not busy for that 10 minutes that they came in and made this comment, but they asked Deb, the assistant administrator, if they could go in the house. And Deb says, I'm sorry, it's not open. And they said, well, we came a really long way. We're from Holland. And so I happened to hear them, and I said, you know what? We're not busy right now. I'll take you in. Now, remember I said that I'm short and I have small feet and I have to duck. This man was 6'8". And so the taller you are, the bigger your feet, right? So he comes in, he walks in, walks over to the staircase, looks up the staircase, because you can look up it, you can't go up it. He looks up it and he goes, yep, looks just like my house. So me being me, I had to ask the question. I said, how do you get up those stairs? He said, very carefully. So, I mean, they're, for me, very narrow, and I have to duck, let alone being 6'8". Well, come to find out, in Holland, you are taxed horizontally because of the canal. You can build vertically as high as you want, and it doesn't matter. But horizontally along the riverfront, that's where you get taxed. So their houses are very narrow with these very narrow staircases. And so the thing that I learned about that is that not only is this in a Carpenter Gothic style, it also leads to, you know, our forefathers and the pioneers that came and migrated across the United States after they were here, after they immigrated here, as they migrated, that this house has somewhat of a Dutch influence as well, because he says it looks just like his house. I thought that was very, very interesting. So like I said, the house is owned by the State Historical Society. It was donated to them by Carl Smith in 1991. Now, because it is the exterior of the house which makes it significant, any traffic in the house more often than that will also lead to the house, you know, getting degraded. And so that's also part of not only the fact that I staff it with my volunteers once a month in those April through October, but it also has to do with trying to preserve the property as long as possible also. Now, the house sits adjacent to the American Gothic House Center. And so the center was built to give tourists to the house more of an experience. Instead of just coming, seeing the house and leaving, we offer that visit a little bit more depth. Inside the center, we have a little bit more about Grant Wood in general, about, excuse me, about Nan. And so the community came together, did a lot of fundraising to build the building that you see in this slide, and the center opened in June of 2007. We do have a gift shop. We are funded by tax dollars because the center and the ground that you see is owned by the city of Eldon. However, the center is managed by Wapello County Conservation Department under, of course, the Wapello County Board of Supervisors. So we do get tax dollars, but we are supposed to be heading towards becoming self-sustaining. We are not there yet, through the donations that we get by our visitors and by the sales of our gift shop. I will tell you that I had a budget meeting today with the Board of Supervisors, and as of right now, admission to the center is free, but that is going to change. So we will be charging a small fee in the very near future. I mean, they have the final say, and they're the ones that said we're going to do it, but it still has to go through the American Gothic House Advisory Board, and then the Conservation Board and then the Wapello County Supervisors with their final approval. But that will be coming down the pike. It will be very small, $5 for ages 13 and over, very small, but necessary in order to continue operations. Nobody lives in the house right now. The last tenant was Beth Howard. She is known as the Pie Lady. She moved out in 2014. And in the 3 years that she lived there, she had a very famous, very popular pie stand. And that kitchen that I showed you a picture of, she sold the pies out of that kitchen. And then when she no longer lived at the Gothic House, she did go around the world. And I guess she thought the rest of the world needed pie. And so she has baked pies in something like 35 different countries. And she has another book out that is called World Peace. We do have that one in our gift shop as well. We also have her cookbook. So I understand that her pies were amazing. They were on the expensive side, but I heard that worth every penny, because when she handed you that pie, it was like a pile of weights. I mean, they were heavy because they were full of whatever fruit or filling that she had in them. She did a new book signing for the World Peace book. She was here in October for the last opening of the house for the season. The two models for the painting, of course, were Grant Wood's sister and his dentist. They did not pose in front of the house. They were never in front of the house together. Nan, you saw a picture of her in front of the house with Carl Smith. She was here apparently a couple times, but never with Dr. McKeevy, never with him. They met 12 years after the painting was completed, and it was actually also after Grant Wood had passed away. And they met and that is at the Art Institute of Chicago, which is where the painting is today. That is one thing that we have guests. that come in and they say, where's the painting? Where's the painting? We don't have that. We have a replica in our gallery, but we don't have the original. Now, I did have someone here about 6 weeks ago, and they said that they had just come from the Art Institute of Chicago. They got there 2 minutes before closing. They were there specifically to see American Gothic, and the guard was very gracious. He let them go in and see it, but she said that it's clear in a basement, clear down in the corner. And it was, she said, quite a jog to get down there to see it, but they did allow her to do just that. So I have seen it, but it was several years ago before I even dreamed of even having this job. I don't remember it being in a basement. I remember it being a little more forthcoming, but she said it's now in a basement. But I imagine everything gets moved around because things don't get seen if you don't do that. So anyway, that's what this lady said. At the center, and again, Steve, if you're there and you're listening, he can attest to the fact that the center is small for the purposes set forth. So one of the original proprietors of this building was a beloved area teacher, and she always dreamed of having education. Well, when I got the job and I watched the introductory video and I heard that, I latched onto that right away, coming from an environmental education background and teaching and doing programs to the public. I mean, I used to see 20,000 people a year and do programs. And so to have that opportunity here, I got very excited until I noticed we don't have anywhere to do those. So the original idea did not include a space for such programming. And in fact, at the top center, that is a little snippet of the gallery. At the bottom, that is a picture of, we have a video of Grant Wood, and you can get about 15 people in there. And so then we have that little gift shop, which they made no plans whatsoever for any kind of gift shop merchandise storage. We have a shed that's outside, and that doesn't work really well when it's 10 below zero and ice, and you have somebody that needs a different size and you're here by yourself. Excuse me, that just doesn't really work out. But we do offer, one thing we do offer is the use of costumes, weather permitting and staff availability permitting. Now, I did just come up with a self-checkout process, so I'm anxious to see how that's going to work. But we'll see how we'll try it. But that is a very popular aspect to our museum, and I feel it's an important one. Although there are some kinks that need to be worked out with that system, and hopefully this is the answer. But you know, people come here, and we have to have a hook, right? You have to have a hook to get people to come to Eldon, Iowa, that has around 700 people, and one restaurant. Now we have another one that's open a couple days a week. So we have to have something else to get them here and to enjoy that experience. And that is a very popular one. Now on the right, those are costumes that I made for school groups. So they can, their whole class can have this same experience. And then because, you know, they're school groups, they're not getting pitchforks. I went to Dollar Tree and bought plastic rakes. And so the kids get to use those. So those are the two different types of costuming that I do have available. Here's kind of the building layout, as you can see, and there's nothing for storage, and there's no place where, you know, I advertise tour groups come here, bus tours come here, but I don't have anywhere to put them. And it all has to be in the summer months, and you better hope it's not raining, because I can get about 15 people in the media room. We can get about 20 people in the exhibition hall, and everybody else has to wait outside until I say switch. So it took me day one to figure that out. And I happened to have a board meeting 2 days later, and I said, we need an addition. And the conservation director said, go for it. I said, what? I said, this is like day 2 for me. He goes, go for it. So I have. And so this is the south side of the building. And on the top, we happen to have an exit door in that gallery, and all that space, you can kind of see where the shed is a little bit. There's a big open space where we could put on an addition. And so with that being said, that addition would go to the west of the building, accessible by that gallery door, get rid of that shed. And I have plans where I can seat 100 people comfortably in that video room, have the video playing where I can address an entire group at once. Because I have to tell you, in September, I had a car club come here. There were 70 people, and I had to involve 2 other entities in town. And we had to go on a rotation because I could only handle about 25 or so of them. And unfortunately, that was the day that it rained. And they needed some place to eat, and I couldn't accommodate that either. So with that being said, I'm hoping to have in that building, not only will there be storage for the gift shop, but to accommodate where I can sit and talk to 100 people at once and tailor the programming to their group and to their interest level. Because yeah, we're about Grant Wood here, but Grant Wood has a lot of different paintings with a lot of different environmental aspects that I can pull in, the area of Eldon, the history of Eldon, like I mentioned earlier, the coal mining, and we have a beautiful prairie garden in front and a nice reconstructed prairie out behind that the conservation department planted and the city men maintain. So there are lots of things that we could come together and do here if I have the room to do it. And so that's kind of an idea, extra bathrooms, because you always can use extra bathrooms. Our own laundry facility, because there's no laundromat in Eldon for those, for the costumes even. So this is just a layout that I did. That's not what ultimately the architect came up with, but pretty darn close. And I applied for a Destination Iowa grant under tourism attraction. And we're still waiting to hear. The governor, I've been to one legislative showcase. I went last week, and I'm heading to another one next week. And I've been in contact with the people who are in charge of divvying up the money, because as far as I know, the money's not all gone yet. And when she heard that the one girl who's on the committee, the one senator, heard that I applied, she said she was going to check into it for me and see where we stood. So I hope that's true. And if not, if this doesn't pan out, we will explore other avenues. Because one thing about this Destination Iowa is you have to prove that you are good for tourism for your community, for Iowa, and how you look good to the United States. Well, here we go. Here's a map of pins of where people have visited, and there is a pin in every single state, and including Puerto Rico, that we have had visitors from. And I can take it a step further. Not only are we known nationally, we are known internationally. And I have pins on over 100 different countries, just from all over the world. And, I really saw that in the tourism this summer. Everybody said at the tourism conference that I went to in April that tourism is going to be down because gas prices are so high, and we had record numbers. And they were people who were driving. They were tired of COVID. They were tired of the restrictions, especially the California people were tired of the restrictions. And of course, if you remember, it was also the airline fiasco. So people were driving. And so we had international visitors, at least 3 a week from different countries. And I had 5 countries represented in one day. Now, when I applied for the grant, ironically, a lot of the people that surf our website, the demographics from the countries that they're from, happen to coincide with the demographics of the people that first inhabited Wapello County. So coincidence, probably, but maybe not, because people are, doing genealogy and following, their roots. But I thought it was very, very interesting. And so we've got that worldwide presence, not just our community, not just Iowa, not just nationally, it's internationally. And so here is for Tourism Iowa, that was one of their sayings. This is the American Gothic House and Center. And to picture yourself here, to try to get people to come here and see what we have to offer. Now, with that being said, I did mention in your chat earlier about Michael Zoss. And so I had the pleasure of visiting with Michael a few times here recently. But again, another funny story. I told you I saw 20,000 people a year at my previous position. When Michael emailed me here at the center, he said, hey, I have this collection. Would you be interested in housing some of it? And I answered back, Michael, it's me, Carrie. You've done 2 programs for me in the past. And so we already knew each other, which worked out very well. He had his collection on display at the Hills Bank in Washington, Iowa. I went and listened to his presentation. That's why I am just remembering him when you were talking about Spring and Country, that he mentioned who at least the gentleman with the shovel in the front is. And he knows the history of the buildings that are in that painting as well. And so when he was finished with his collection at the Hills Bank, he asked me if I wanted to house some of it. Now, again, I just showed you my floor plan. There's not a lot of room for that. And I only have 2 cases that are enclosed in glass, and then the gift shop counter also. And so I do have some of his collection here. In a minute, I'll get out of my PowerPoint, but I do want to tell you that Michael is coming here to speak for Grant Wood's birthday. He was unavailable the weekend of the 11th. So we just bumped up the birthday celebration a week early, and he is going to come speak the morning of the 4th at 10 o'clock. Now, because of my limited capacity, I only have 25 participants that can come to that particular talk. If I have more people that are interested, he will do another presentation at 11:15. Because that afternoon, I'm going to have the center closed to the public, so you have to pre-register. I will open the center at 1 o'clock, and then I'll have a children's event at 2 o'clock. Traditionally, they have had a soup supper at the Katy Center in town, which I went ahead and I did status quo when I first got this job. And I said, okay, we'll do what we've always done until I see what we can do better. Well, if we're going to promote Grant Wood, I'm sorry, but I have a problem doing it at the Katy Center downtown. It needs to be here. It needs to be here. And so that's why Michael's going to speak that morning, because part of his collection is here. He is going to debut 2 paintings that he recently received. 2 original Grant Wood paintings. I have 2 of his right now of the original paintings, but he has 2 more, and he's going to show them for the very first time at his presentation on Saturday the 4th. He's going to show them. And so, like I said, you do have to pre-register, so I know to make sure that I don't have too many people at once. And I have little gift bags, so I, make sure that I have enough of that. But
Kari,
with that being said, I stopped my share. Stop my share. There we go.
oh, Kari, that's so awesome. And by the way, I registered a couple more friends today.
Oh, good. Oh,
So-
yeah. I recognized your name when it came through. Yep.
Yeah, so a couple more. And so there'll be 3 of us for sure coming down, and anybody
Awesome.
else. I could squeeze 2 more in my vehicle leaving from Newton at 8 a.m. If
Awesome.
anybody else wants to be in the car.
Awesome. Well, right now I have 2 paintings. I have Urban Landscape and I have Cabin in the Woods. Both of them are around the 1920s. Those are 2 paintings that Grant Wood brought back with him from Europe. And according to Michael, that's kind of a rare thing because he didn't bring too many back with him. And I have 2 of them here. And a lot of the other things I have are signed items by Grant Wood. So like, Grant Wood designed upholstery, and he did a house for Robert and Esther Armstrong. He designed the house. He just, as I understand it, he designed the furniture and the upholstery, and I have a piece of that upholstery as well. I've got a lithograph. I've got Racehorse. I have a book that was signed by him, the book Main Street by Sinclair Lewis. I have that one. The little history with that. I have a signed book, Farm on the Hill, along with some prints from that book that Grant Wood signed for his sister in the event she needed to sell them to make money, so in case she was hungry. So she would never go hungry.
That's so neat to hear everything that you're up to in Eldon. Thank you so much for getting us up to speed. And we're in your corner. You got a critical mass of enthusiasts right here.
Awesome.
So I'm so glad that we're here, and we'll spread the word about some of the neat things. And be sure to check the chat. There's maybe some questions and some things people you may or may not want to connect with there. And with the thank you again, Sean and Kari, so much. Oh my gosh, I knew we were going to have a great doubleheader, and sure enough, all kinds of fun stuff we're experiencing. And last but definitely not least, to get you, now you've had all this inspiration, let's hear a little bit from Dawn. She has got a suggestion for a writing form for us to try.
Yeah, thanks, Elaine. Yeah, thanks so much. I don't know if somebody can put that up and then kind of scroll through as I'm chatting, but I think last time I was here, we were talking about contrapuntal poems, and there we go. I don't know if you can, yeah, that's perfect. We're talking about contrapuntal poetry, and this is really a weird place to start a conversation about form, because it's not one of those forms that you're going to find really in a lot of books about form. Okay, so first of all, contrapuntal means a melodic blend of 2 independent harmonies. They're supposed to go together, and you hear this a lot in contemporary music. It's also a very old kind of music. So contrapuntal takes that entire idea of, here are 2 voices, sometimes more, and these voices, they interact in a harmonious way, and occasionally they will clash, which is very interesting. So the contrapuntal poem, and I know not all of you are poets out there, but I think maybe this conversation will help you think about how you might have that conversation with art which is what we talked about last time, is that ekphrastic writing is a conversation with art. What points of engagement do you find as an audience or somebody who's interacting with that piece? What's your entry point? Is it through a character? Is it through putting yourself in the shoes of the artist, or that eye? Does it come from color? Does it come from place? A place that will remember? So I just wanted to share with you some different styles of contrapuntal poems. And I want you to think about some of the art that we saw this evening. I'm going to go back to Sean's conversation, and I was thinking, oh my goodness, this is a perfect presentation before talking about contrapuntal poems, because I thought about, imagine the mourner's bench. Imagine that you are a school child sitting on that bench outside of the principal's office. What's the voice of the bench? What children have they seen for what infractions? If you're a boy that is a or girl who is a frequent customer on that bench. I thought about the door, Grant Wood's door, and if it was something that was, used, the same style as a coffin lid. Imagine that conversation and the voice of, a before or after. This is, a coffin lid. This is, you're opening up to Grant Wood Studio. I mean, that's very provocative in my mind, or very evocative in my mind. And the other one was the map of, was it John B. Nielsen? Imagine that it's, the map behind the subject of the portrait. Imagine it's the map of the face. What are the conversations, or what are those independent melodies that you could imagine? And how could you put that in a contrapuntal poem? So I'm just kind of asking you to think about that as we go through this. So first, I'm not going to read all of the, I'm not going to read very many of them, but I'll read this one to remind you how a contrapuntal poem works. This is by a poet named Danielle Badra, and Danielle is an amazing poet who has a book of a collection of poetry, who started writing contrapuntal poems as a way to cope with the loss of her sister, because she imagined a conversation that she would have with her sister in many of the poems. So the way this works is that you read the left side first, then you read the right side, then you read the entire poem horizontally across the two stanzas. So I'm going to start this. Permanently. There is a storm coming, thickly painted clouds press your house, sunlit in glossy whites and blues blotted out, darkened. There will be no room for light in your halls. The greens and reds of the flowers fade. On red, fall away entirely. There will be only gray left, gray, scooped out with a trowel pasted on. You will breathe it in. Fleeting across fields of color, pipe smoke out an open window, black ink into a bowl of reduced fat milk, a canvas, greens and tangerines, torn apart. Your accident was altered to look like art, rust-colored hinges, ochre and orange and red, gathered in the garage beside a box of your old clothes, of maroon socks and green sweaters, your favorite painting folded up, a faint memory, you will breathe it in. There is a storm coming, fleeting across fields of color, thickly painted clouds, pipe smoke out an open window, press black ink into a bowl of reduced fat milk. Your house, a canvas, sunlit in glossy whites, greens and tangerines, and blues blotted out, torn apart, darkened. There will be no room for your accident. Light in your halls was altered to look like art. The greens and reds of rust-colored hinges, the flowers fade, ochre and orange and red on red, fall away entirely, gathered in the garage beside a box of your old clothes. There will be only gray left, of maroon socks and green sweaters, gray, your favorite painting folded up, scooped out with a trowel, pasted on a faint memory. You will breathe it in. So it's a very, very gorgeous kind of flowing poem. I love that it's about art. I love that it incorporates the colors and just, you know, the beautiful sensory images. And you'll notice that this one does not use punctuation. Punctuation is tough, but punctuation can also make it better. But what Danielle Badra does is she uses spacing to create tension, to create distance. And she also uses really smart line breaks to serve as punctuation. So think about even the sculptural quality of the way the poem or the writing sits on the page. I'm going to have you go to the next one. Who's ever behind the Zoom controls? Thank you. So this is one that I recently had published in a journal called Quartet, and it's called Night Flights. And I'm not going to read this, and I don't know if there's a way that we can, you know, share this document on our Zoom site. But the interesting thing about this is that this came from a prompt called Love and Loathe. You're supposed to write a poem about something that you love, and then counter it with something that you loathe. And so I did that as a two-voiced poem. So on the left-hand side, you have the things that are loved. On the right-hand side, the things that are loathed. And you can also see in this particular poem, it does take on a little bit of a sculpture quality with the spacing, right? So it's butted up against, the two sides are butted up against each other with that space in the middle, but then there are also areas toward the middle where there's just, you know, a single word or two words that then really kind of help offset the rest of it. So that's another example of what a contrapuntal poem might look like. I'm going to have you move on, Elaine. This is a poem by A.E. Stallings, who's a favorite. I don't know if you're familiar with the work of A.E. Stallings, but she is a classical and neo-formalist poet. And I don't know if you can make that just a little bit bigger. Just kind of put the magnet, there we go, the zoom over it, perfect. And you can see, so I am later in the session, I'm going to be talking about form in the sense of the forms that were used at the time that Grant Wood was writing. We're going to learn about J. Sigmund, looking at some of the, you know, the quatrains with rhyme scheme. We'll look at sonnets that rhymed. And I know a lot of you out there who are poets, you're thinking, I would rather die than write a rhyming poem. But I tell you what, once you are mesmerized by it and you figure out how to wrestle the beast, it's easy and very satisfying. But you'll see here A.E. Stallings, she wrote a rhyming contrapuntal poem, and that each side has a rhyme scheme, and those tercet stanzas, each side rhymes. It's just crazy. This one blew my mind. I would never. So don't try this at home. This may drive you crazy, but it's a very interesting style. So as we look later down the road and we're looking at some of those rhyme schemes, you might think, well, that was a really interesting idea. So we'll continue on. Sometimes I think this is the one. I love this one. This was on Poetry Foundation. This is by, and you might enlarge it just a little bit. This is a little bit of, this is by Tarfia Fazula, and it's a little bit of a call and response poem. This is considered contrapuntal because if you read the left side, read it all the way down, that is a poem unto itself, as is the right side all the way down. But the way that you read it then across is, if you start at the beginning, let me break free of these lace frail lilac fingers disrobing the black sky from the windows of this room. I sit helpless waiting, and it goes on. So I had to actually take a screenshot in order to get it to fit on a page. So that's why you see that awkward line in the middle. Sorry about that. But I just wanted you to see this. This is a mesmerizing poem. And I hope that you'll take a moment to read it if you have an opportunity to, if we can post it someplace. And we'll continue on. This is a poem in 3 voices or 3 parts, contrapuntal poem by Teresia Sayegotano. And it's a really interesting poem about identity. And each of these stanzas, each of these vertical, single stanzas are independent poems. And then you read it across the three as you're putting that contrapuntal together. And let me tell you too about how do you write these. The way I write them, I've written a three section contrapuntal like this. You always write these as independent poems, always kind of, you figure out what topic is each section addressing, because what you don't want to have happen is that you start writing off of the one that, is going to be the other stanza. And you often come up with a weaker contrapuntal that way. You'll have somebody say to you, you know what, the right side is really a lot weaker than the left side. You don't want that. You want these to be equally buffed out, right? If you think about bodybuilding terms. So it's really nice if you can write those independently, then move them together and then just see, okay, now what do I need to tweak in order to make this work? So that's at least my approach. And then there's another one I believe here that's really kind of interesting. So this is called At the Intersection, and this is by a poet named Brian Bilston. And this is a Venn diagram contrapuntal. At the intersection, the hymn side, you have it. So you need to actually read into that where the circles overlap. So it would be the day we went out to have an ice cream. We said nothing, just let our silence melt in the air as we walked across the common, our love never tiring. Then her side would be, we should have talked it over, but nothing ever seems to get in your fat head. You were so common that I wish we never met at all, and I'd married Tim instead. And then the poem in the middle, that third poem, we have nothing in common at all. So that's another way to think about this, doing this poem, is it makes it more visual. It makes it more structural in terms of, seeing this. So you might think about that too. There is another type of poem called concrete poems or shape poems or Carmen Figuritum poems. You could even think about from a contrapuntal point of view, how might you do those? So this is really, when you think about some of the art that we saw this evening, and you think about how can I use that art as a prompt for 2 voices or more. These are just, containers. We talked about containers earlier this evening. These are containers for those thoughts and those words. So, yep, that's it. Do you have any questions? I know you could write a long time before you ever decided to do a contrapuntal, but they're kind of satisfying. So anyway, thanks a lot, Elaine, for helping out with that. We can't hear you, Elaine. You're muted.
I'm so perpetually awkward with that. That was actually Meredith. Thank you, Meredith.
Thanks, Meredith.
For stepping in and helping seamlessly. She was far more seamless than I would have been. But thank you so much, everyone, for coming and staying. Thank you, Sean and Kari and Dawn. And I just hope to hear from you this week. If anybody has something that they've written, if not, if I don't hear from anybody during the week, we can talk again next week and keep the momentum building and look forward to immersing ourselves in rural life, all things rural life, springboarding from Grant Wood, thanks to Steve Hankin next week. So I anticipate that next week we will have a fair bit of time to have some conversation, which I think we're overdue to have some of everybody have a little bit of more time to chat. And so I'd like to see that happen next week a little bit. So I just want to let you know that I'm thinking about that and want to hear your voices and your thoughts going forward as we're getting into the series. So, does anybody have anything they need to add before we head on down the road for the week? Oh, I did want to ask one thing to follow up, because Joe and Ignacio, I know you've been to see American Gothic recently, and was it in a basement in Chicago?
I'm trying to remember the wing. There's a down area. It's way past the main foyer. I don't know if I would call it a basement. I mean, it's a huge room with a very high ceiling, and it's a large room. I see Sean shaking his head. I don't think it's considered a basement. Is it, Sean or Ignacio?
Okay. Oh, goodness. So, yeah, just kind of wondering what that, so anyway, yeah. That's why we have people here who are far flung, who have different experiences out there. So that's fun. So, again, thank you all so much. We'll see you next week. And we are both, Meredith and I are trying to communicate thoroughly with folks. And so, please try not to be too annoyed if you get slammed with some emails. We just want to make sure all the information gets out there every week. And so take care until we see you again. And so
Thank you,
Thanks so
Carrie.
much.
Or Elaine. And Sean, thank you.
Thanks, everybody.